Paris, June 1981. The city was still as picturesque as ever, with cobblestone streets and sidewalk cafes glowing brightly under the sun. But in a ground-floor apartment in the 16th district, a place often overlooked by most, a strange smell was quietly seeping through the door crack. A pungent, sweet, and warm scent, like molten metal. The smell of blood. The smell of human flesh. The smell of death. The small apartment, barely 20 square meters, was cluttered with torn books, old drawing papers, and dust-covered recording equipment. On the table was a bottle of red wine almost finished, a plate with leftover meat fragments, and an open notebook with scrawled writing. Day 1. Left thigh, fried in butter. Soft meat, light aroma, slightly reminiscent of foie gras. Issei Sagawa, the apartment's owner, a Japanese literature student, had left this place 3 days ago. No one had seen him. No one had heard the small Japanese man greet the morning as usual. But it was his silent disappearance that led the police to this place. 3 days ago, Renee Hartevelt, a Dutch student who attended the same class as Issei, suddenly went missing. She didn't show up for class, didn't return home, and left no message. Her friends began to worry. The Paris police took note of the information, but like with any other case, no signs of force, no evidence, no one to suspect. Until a gray suitcase was found floating by the lakeside in Bois de Boulogne Park. The suitcase was strangely heavy. When opened, the police saw a sight they would never forget. A pale, curled-up arm, a severed calf. The pieces of flesh were loosely wrapped in a woman's shirt. No head, no organs. But still, there was blonde hair, and the smell of decaying human flesh under the summer rain. Following the suitcase's serial number, the police traced the store it was purchased from. It took only a few hours to track down the buyer, Issei Sagawa. The door to his apartment opened, leading them into a room soaked in blood and secrets. In the fridge were plastic bags containing human flesh. In the sink was a surgical knife. Next to the stove was a cast iron pot with traces of fat, and in the trash, broken bones wrapped in newspaper. In the middle of the room, a tape recorder was still running. It replayed a soft, warm voice, a girl reading poetry in French. And the moonlight falls like blood. Commit such a grotesque crime. But the more they uncovered his past, the more they discovered something even more terrifying. This was not an impulsive act, not a moment of madness, but a plan that had been prepared for his entire life. He was born in Japan into a powerful and wealthy family. From a young age, he was obsessed with Western skin, soft flesh, and body tissues. When he was in middle school, he snuck into the house of a Western female teacher, attempting to cut a piece of her thigh to taste it. He was caught, but thanks to his father's wealth, the case was buried. He was sent abroad, to France, to study European literature. The truth? He wasn't studying literature. He was hunting for prey. And Renee Hartevelt was the first one to meet all his criteria. Blue eyes, white skin, kindness, and innocence. He planned everything meticulously. He invited her over to record a Japanese poem, using the excuse of a class assignment. She agreed, without a second thought. To her, Issei was just a shy, likable friend, someone who could never harm anyone. As she read the poem, he slowly stepped behind her, drawing the small gun he had hidden in his jacket. One bullet, one fall, one corpse. And then, a meal. Tokyo, 1951. Issei Sagawa was born weighing just over 1.3 kilograms, a tiny being that could fit into the palm of the doctor's hand. People thought he wouldn't survive, but he did, and he grew up like a different kind of creature. From a young age, Issei was quieter than other children. He didn't cry, laugh, or get angry. He just observed, his gaze fixed on the smallest movements, insects crawling, dried blood stains, a sharp knife gleaming in the kitchen. When he was in second grade, one of his favorite activities was using a needle to poke at the belly of a mouse, then recording its reactions. One day, his mother found a box full of dead kittens under his bed. She was horrified and screamed. Issei, however, just stood there, smiling. A strange smile, soft, polite, as if apologizing, yet his eyes were devoid of any emotion. He was born into a wealthy and prestigious family. His father was the CEO of a large publishing company. The family lacked for nothing except connection. He wasn't beaten, wasn't scolded, but he wasn't truly loved either. He was like a strange object that no one knew what to do with. In high school, Issei became even more unusual. While his friends put up pictures of idols or cars on their walls, he hung anatomical drawings of the human body. University, majoring in English literature. He had noticed a white foreign exchange student in his class. He stalked her, learned her schedule, and one night sneaked into her apartment through the window. In his hand was a fruit knife and an unthinkable intention. But the girl woke up. She screamed. Neighbors called the police. He was arrested. That should have marked the beginning of a harsh sentence. But his father intervened once again. The incident was described as a temporary aberration, and he wasn't prosecuted. He only had to stay in a psychiatric hospital for a few weeks before being released. No criminal record. No one knew. And he smiled again, gently, politely. From that point on, he knew he needed another place, somewhere where he could try again, without being noticed. With the excuse of studying French literature, Issei was sent to Paris by his father. When he arrived there, he felt like he had just stepped into a world full of potential meals. White women, exactly his ideal type, appeared everywhere. Parks, lecture halls, trains. He didn't see them as people. He saw them as food. Every evening, he would walk for hours through the streets, observing, taking notes, evaluating. Thigh, too slim, probably tough. Pretty face, but the chest is not attractive. Pale skin, needs marinating first. These notes, he didn't write them for fun. He wrote like a chef studying ingredients. He carried within him a hunger, one that couldn't be satisfied, couldn't be soothed, nothing could replace it. And then he met Renée Hartevelt, the Dutch girl in his class at Sorbonne University. Tall, blonde, bright eyes, a gentle voice, and rare kindness. She didn't avoid Issei like the others. On the contrary, she talked to him about poetry, philosophy, and sometimes about loneliness. The closer he got, the more obsessed he became. But not in the usual way. He didn't want to hold her hand. He didn't want to kiss her. He wanted to eat her. A part of him wanted to resist. He had tried praying. He had even gone to see a doctor, but no one understood. No one believed that his hunger was real, persistent, torturing. Then one day, when Renee accidentally touched his shoulder in the library and smiled, he knew the time had come. He began preparing, slowly, not in a frenzy, step by step, coldly, like a scientist. He bought a gun, a surgical knife, tape, a suitcase. He rehearsed it.
"Is that okay?" "Perfect," he said, his voice as gentle as a man scheduling a study session. As soon as she hung up, Issei dropped to the floor. His hands were trembling like he had a fever. His mouth hung open as if he was about to faint from excitement. He whispered, "She's coming. She'll be mine, forever." The night before the feast. That whole night he couldn't sleep. He cleaned his apartment, scrubbed every corner of the kitchen, laid a white sheet over the mattress, placed 2 glass wine glasses on the coffee table, pouring a little red wine. He even changed the curtains, red, the color of blood. He put on his suit, chose a light classical piece of music, and set it playing. Placed the recorder on the bookshelf, aimed at where she would sit. Every detail was controlled, like a director preparing for his first show. Finally, he opened the cabinet and pulled out the small gun. He placed it under the paper lining on the table, within easy reach. His fingers brushed the cold barrel, his eyes unblinking, sweat soaking his collar. Renee arrives. At 5:05 p.m., a soft knock echoed at the door. 3 knocks, light, even, not cautious. He opened the door. Renee walked in with her usual smile. She wore a blue cotton dress, her hair neatly tied, carrying a Japanese poetry book printed at the university. She didn't notice that the apartment looked different today. She didn't see the dining table set as though for a date. She simply sat down on the mat, placed the book on her lap, and smiled. "Shall we begin?" He nodded. His heart was beating so fast he feared she could hear it. But his face didn't change. Still, that small, shy smile, the perfect disguise for the monster inside. She started reading the poem. Her voice rang out, soft, steady, smooth as velvet. Under the silver moon, the soul dissolves, love's words like the wind, fragile to the point of invisibility. He couldn't hear it clearly anymore. His eyes were fixed on her neck, where the pulse beat clearly under her pale skin. Paris, June 1981. Issei Sagawa's small ground-floor apartment lay in silence, swallowed by shadows. Inside, everything was meticulously prepared. The kitchen was spotless. The surgical knives had been sharpened. A tape recorder sat at the center of the table. 2 glasses of red wine waited patiently. New crimson curtains painted the room in a strange, ominous light. Issei paced back and forth, hands trembling. He had planned this for weeks. Every step was written down, rehearsed in his mind. Hair tied up, holding the book of Japanese poetry he had asked her to read. She didn't suspect a thing. She trusted him, saw him as nothing more than a shy, awkward Japanese classmate. She had no idea she was stepping into the lair of a predator. He invited her to sit on a mattress laid out on the floor. Everything looked normal. Soft music played. Evening light filtered in gently. She asked, "Shall I start from the second stanza?" "Yes," he replied. "Read naturally. I'm just recording." Renee began reading,
her voice smooth and calm, like silk sliding over glass. Issei sat behind her, his eyes fixated on her neck, so pale, so soft, just below the hairline. His heartbeat thudded like a war drum. His palms were slick with sweat. Slowly he leaned forward, reached under the cushion, and gripped the gun he had hidden there. Under the silver moonlight, the soul dissolves. Her poetry rang through the room like a funeral hymn. He stood up, silently, gun in hand. Renee didn't turn around. She didn't hear a thing. He aimed directly at the back of her neck. A moment of stillness. Then the trigger pulled. The gunshot tore through the air. Renee collapsed forward, the book flying from her hands, blood spurting from the base of her skull, staining the white mattress beneath her. Issei froze. His hand trembled. His eyes widened. His breathing came in short, panicked gasps. He dropped to his knees, touching her body. The blood was still warm. He touched her cheek, kissed her forehead, whispered, "You're so beautiful. You'll stay with me now, forever." He pressed play on the tape recorder. Her voice echoed through the room, reciting poetry again and again, looping endlessly, like he was trapping her soul inside the tape, keeping her alive in sound. He didn't touch the body right away. He just sat beside her for hours, watching. The sun outside dipped below the skyline. The city lights flickered on. The apartment felt like a sealed-off surgery room, cold and patient. That night he changed clothes, put on a butcher's apron, and closed the crimson curtains. He picked up a knife. His hands still shook slightly, but his eyes were calm. He began with the left thigh, the part he had fantasized about for years as being the softest, the most delicious. One long cut, skin split open, revealing fat and muscle beneath. Blood oozed out like warm ink. He didn't scream. He wasn't afraid. He just breathed deeply and continued cutting. The first piece of flesh was placed neatly on a porcelain plate. He brought it to the kitchen, heated butter, raised the pan. The meat sizzled loudly as it touched the surface.
The hunger that had tormented him all his life was finally satisfied. But that was only the first bite. The hunger didn't fade. If anything, it flared up more violently after the first bite. It was as if he had unlocked a door, one that led directly to his truest self. Not a lover, not a scholar, but a predator. A creature born not to love, but to tear apart and consume the ones he desired. Issei wiped his mouth with a napkin and stood up, staring down at Renee's corpse. Her eyes were still slightly open, lips parted, as if reciting the unfinished poem. But her body was growing cold. Death had stiffened her limbs, tightened her skin, turned her complexion into a pale bluish wax. He knelt beside her, gently turned her onto her stomach. One shoulder slumped awkwardly. Her long hair sprawled across the floor. His fingers traced her spine, vertebra by vertebra, a soft curve leading to more hidden flesh. His eyes gleamed like someone who had found hidden treasure. This time, he chose her back. He made careful incisions, slicing gently like a surgeon. But his hands no longer trembled. The blade glided through her skin with a slow, deliberate rhythm. He hummed an old Japanese children's song as he worked, his voice warped and cracked from blood and mania. The second, third, fourth pieces of meat followed. He wrapped them neatly in wax paper and stored them in the fridge. Others he hung in the kitchen to air dry. Each part of the body was evaluated, categorized like ingredients in a Michelin star kitchen. Soft tissue, good for pan frying. Veiny, better for stews. Lean, might make decent sausage. Blood soaked the floor. It seeped into the tile cracks, clung to the legs of the table, splattered across the rug. He didn't clean it up immediately.
Instead, he stared at it like an artist admiring a completed canvas. To him, everything was beautiful, a sick, grotesque kind of beauty. The Cannibal's Diary. For the next 3 days, he lived with the corpse. He didn't attend class, didn't answer calls, didn't leave the apartment. The place became a tomb, a sanctuary for his twisted worship. Each day, he wrote detailed entries in a journal. Day 2, shoulder meat, slightly gamey, better when grilled with garlic. Day 3, abdominal skin, tried a raw slice, too pungent, needs marination. Day 3, evening, palm, chewy but strangely aromatic, fried in sesame oil. Human flesh became his daily ritual. He ate with proper cutlery, napkin on his lap, soft classical music playing in the background. He consumed her with reverence, like attending a sacred ceremony. Things no one should ever know. On the 3rd night, he decided to try the breast,
Not because it was tasty, but because it felt like victory, possession. He was taking in the very essence of the woman he had once admired from afar. He laughed, then cried, then laughed again. He rolled on the blood-stained floor, caught in a frenzy of ecstasy and insanity. The body begins to rot. By the 4th day, the corpse began to smell. Despite lighting incense, opening windows, and spraying perfume, the scent of death clung to every corner. He tried to cut the remaining usable meat, wrapping it tightly, rinsing it in wine, masking it with air fresheners. But it wasn't enough. He knew that neighbors would soon notice. He had to dispose of what was left. The suitcase of death. He bought a large suitcase, lined the bottom with newspapers, placed the remaining body parts inside, arms, head, back, right leg. He stuffed them carefully, almost tenderly, as if still honoring what remained of Renee. Late at night, he took a taxi to the Bois de Boulogne Park. Rain fell lightly. The grass was wet and soft. He dragged the suitcase across the mud and stopped near a quiet pond. No one was around, only the gentle lapping of water. He knelt beside the suitcase and whispered, "Thank you for staying with me." Then he pushed it into the water. It sank slowly, gurgling, bubbles rising to the surface, red and foamy. He turned and walked away, slow, calm, relieved, like a man who had just finished a chore. He had no idea that by morning a sanitation worker would find that suitcase and everything would begin to unravel. The suitcase drifted ashore at dawn. A city sanitation worker found it wedged beneath a willow tree near the pond. He thought it might contain old clothes or garbage, but the moment he unzipped it, he collapsed, screaming. Inside were fragments of a woman's body, pale, stiff, and partially wrapped in blood-soaked newspapers. Blonde hair matted with dried blood, a hand still intact with chipped red nail polish. The police arrived within the hour, sealing off the area. Forensics confirmed the body parts belonged to a young female, dismembered with surgical precision. There were no signs of torture, but some parts were missing, clearly cut out post-mortem. By noon, they had identified the victim, Renee Hartevelt, a Dutch literature student studying at the Sorbonne. She had been reported missing 3 days earlier. The last person she had been in contact with was Issei Sagawa. Detectives went straight to his address on Rue Erlanger. The apartment was silent. Curtains drawn, no movement. They knocked. Issei answered the door, calm and expressionless, but the stench that wafted from behind him made the officers recoil. They entered, fork still stuck in it, next to an empty glass of red wine. On the wall hung a photograph of Renee, taped above a sheet of paper, a copy of her poem. Below it sat a diary, a cannibal's diary, filled with entries documenting each cut, each meal, each sensation.
The officers could barely bring themselves to read more than a page. When they questioned him, Issei didn't resist. He didn't deny anything. He simply nodded, smiling faintly. "I killed her," he said. "I ate her because I wanted to keep her with me, forever." His confession chilled the room. Soon, the Paris police headquarters was in chaos. News of the horrifying murder spread quickly. At first, officials tried to keep it quiet, but rumors flew faster than any press release. A Japanese man had killed and eaten a beautiful white woman, and he had done so calmly, methodically, without remorse. Within days, the media descended on the story like vultures. Headlines screamed about the Japanese cannibal in Paris. Cameras camped outside the police station. Reporters begged for details. The public wanted blood. But what they got was something much worse. When Issei was transferred to a holding cell, a journalist managed to capture a photo of him. His expression was calm, polite, smiling. That smile haunted every viewer. Psychiatrists were brought in. They interviewed Issei for days. He told them everything, about his childhood, the first time he fantasized about eating someone, the failed break-in at his teacher's house, the nosebleeds caused by sexual arousal, the endless fantasies. The final diagnosis: severe sexual psychopathy with cannibalistic fixation, but not legally insane. That became the real problem. Because Issei was a Japanese citizen, the French courts were reluctant to try him under French law. His father, a wealthy and influential businessman with ties to media and politics, arranged for his son to be deported to Japan to face trial there. Many protested. Others were relieved. But the worst was yet to come. When he boarded the plane to Tokyo, he wasn't handcuffed. He was escorted politely, placed in a business-class seat. It's said that during the flight, he was served a gourmet meal with red wine. He ate it slowly, silently, his eyes closed as he chewed. No one dared to speak to him, because everyone knew he wasn't tasting beef. But what followed was even more disturbing. Once in Japan, officials reviewed his psychiatric evaluations from France and ruled that Issei Sagawa was mentally unfit for trial. He was never charged. Instead, he was committed to a private psychiatric institution, not a prison, no bars, no documentaries, reenacted his own crime. He posed for photos, signed autographs, appeared on talk shows, became a grotesque celebrity, the cannibal who smiled on camera. And he never once apologized. He only ever said, "She was too beautiful. I had no choice." Years later, people would still remember the case, not because of the crime, but because of what came after. Issei Sagawa, the man who murdered and ate his classmate, was not punished. He was made famous, and he was still smiling. The news spread fast across Japan. A man who had murdered and eaten his classmate in Paris was now living freely in their own country. Tabloids exploded. Nighttime talk shows picked apart the case every evening. People didn't know whether to be horrified or fascinated. Soon, he had a nickname: the Smiling Cannibal. Not long after his release from the psychiatric facility, Issei Sagawa began granting interviews. He sat calmly in a suit and tie, posture perfect, eyes blinking slowly, hands folded neatly in his lap. He didn't look dangerous. He didn't look like a monster. But every word he spoke chilled the air. An interviewer asked, "Do you feel remorse?" Issei tilted his head, then smiled. "Yes, but not because I killed her, because I couldn't finish eating the rest." The studio went dead silent. No laughter,
No breath, just the sound of something deeply wrong settling into every heart watching. From that moment, his fame grew like a virus. He published books. One of them detailed every moment of the murder, how he carved her, cooked her, tasted her, loved her in death. He described textures, smells, temperatures, emotion. No metaphor, no euphemism, just raw, horrifying honesty. The book sold out in days. Documentary crews followed. Directors offered him money to reenact his crimes. One horror film even cast him as the killer, a role he played with disturbing ease. He wrote essays, comics, collaborated with pornographic magazines, combining cannibalism and erotic fantasy into grotesque illustrations. Each piece was more depraved than the last, and people bought them. They paid him. In some sick way, Issei Sagawa had become an icon of the grotesque, a man whose evil had been turned into entertainment, not a monster in a cage, but a celebrity with fans. But fame is fleeting. As the years dragged on, interest in his story began to fade. New killers replaced him in the public eye, younger, bloodier, more tragic. His books stopped selling. Publishers stopped calling. He grew old. The man who once fantasized about young flesh now had no teeth strong enough. Whispered. Some crossed the street when they saw him near the elevator. Each day he left only to buy packaged food from a nearby convenience store. He ate quietly, slept most of the day, and sometimes just sat in the corner, staring at an old photo of Renee, still taped to his wall. When someone once asked him what he thought about death, he said,
"I think I'll see her again. Maybe then she'll eat me."
In 2013, he suffered a major stroke. Half of his body became paralyzed. He could no longer speak clearly, couldn't write, couldn't feed himself. He was now completely dependent on others, strangers who had to clean his body, change his diaper, wipe his mouth. No one wanted the job, but money was money. A middle-aged caregiver was assigned to him. The man never spoke to Issei unless necessary. He avoided eye contact. But even then, every time he leaned in to clean the cannibal's face, Issei would smile. Not out of kindness, but because smiling was all he had left. He could no longer murder, could no longer speak, could no longer write his dark fantasies, but he could smile. That faint, eerie curve of the lips, the last expression of the man who had once devoured another human being. November 24th, 2022. Issei Sagawa died in silence. No funeral, no family, no headlines. His body was cremated, his ashes scattered at sea. Nothing remained of him. No grave, no shrine, no name etched in stone. But his story didn't die. It lived on in banned books, in cursed audio tapes, in YouTube horror videos, in whispered conversations at night, in the nightmares of those who had ever seen his face on camera, smiling, polite, small and quiet. And behind that smile, a bottomless pit of blood and bone.